Today I want to take a look at this video from Robert Reich on YouTube. For those who don't know, Robert Reich, he's a pretty darling economics expert of the left. This video was put up 11 days ago, already has 115,000 views. His YouTube channel has over 657,000 subscribers. Video is titled, How Wall Street Priced You Out of a Home. All right, let's see what Robert Reich has to say here.
Investor purchases hit their peak in 2022, accounting for around 28% of all home sales in America.
Oh, no. So are we getting that? Investor purchases peaked in 2022, accounting for 28% of all home purchases.
Homebuyers frequently reported being outbid by cash offers made by investors. So-called iBuyers used algorithms to instantly buy homes before offers could even be made by actual human beings.
Yeah, actual human beings are being outbid by greedy fat cats on Wall Street.
If the present trend continues, by 2030, Wall Street investors may control 40% of U.S. single-family rental homes.
Oh, no.
Partly as a result, home ownership, a cornerstone of generational wealth and a big part of the American dream, is increasingly out of reach for a large number of Americans.
Now, that point he's not entirely wrong on.
Especially young people. Now, Wall Street's feasting has slowed recently.
All right, now he's citing a Wall Street Journal article that shows that this rate has actually slowed over the years, but we're going to go ahead and jump ahead to this point in the video.
Folks, it's a vicious cycle. First, you're outbid by investors. Then you may be stuck renting from them at excessive prices that leave you with even less money to put up for a new home. Rinse, repeat.
Vicious cycle.
Now, I want to be clear. This is just one part of the problem with housing in America. The lack of supply is considered the biggest reason why home prices and rents have soared. And
oh, really? Lack of supply, huh?
And are outpacing recent wage gains. But Wall Street sinking its teeth into whatever is left on the market is making the supply problem even worse.
Yeah, guys, it's all Wall Street's fault. Now, what's interesting about this is, you know who else has a history of lobbying against the development of new housing units? It's people like Robert Reich, who has a history of lobbying his local government to stop the development of new housing units.
Oh, you absolutely suck!
Now, I've talked about this before, so I'm not going to beat that dead horse, but isn't this a fascinating trend with Robert Reich? He has this habit of lobbying for economic policies that make things worse, drive up the cost of living, and then when we all have to deal with the consequences of policies that he advocates for, he finds other scapegoats to point his finger at. Robert Reich has a history of lobbying to restrict fossil fuel production and phase out fossil fuel production and consumption to save the world from climate change. And then when gasoline prices go up, oil prices go up, when gasoline prices and energy prices are higher than they otherwise would be, then Robert Reich comes out and then points his finger and blames big oil greed. Or like when it came to COVID stimulus spending, economic stimulus spending between 2020 and 2021, Robert Reich downplayed concerns over inflation, and then when inflation hit, he found some greedy corporations to point his finger at. Said it was corporate greed just jacking up prices to make record profits. And now we have Robert Reich, who has a history of, again, lobbying against the development of new housing. And now that we have housing shortages, he's going to point his finger at fat cats on Wall Street, I guess. First, let's address this talking point about how investors bought 28% of the homes in 2022. This is a very misleading statistic, very misleading claim. He's doing this to put this thought in your head that it's just, capital, big hedge funds, big players on Wall Street buying up all the houses. Might help to first clarify what exactly an investor is. Thankfully, actual Justice Warrior already did this about 3 years ago, back in 2021, when reacting to Crystal and Sagar, populist left and populist right coming together to take on the establishment. Actual Justice Warrior had to explain what an investor is and how misleading these claims are.
So Crystal is all over the place here, and in fact, she's mixing up multiple different articles that reference different phenomenon that we're seeing in the housing market. But first, we have to zero in on this statistic so that you can understand it about how 1 in 5 new purchasers of single-family homes are investors, specifically, potentially, private capital.
Yeah.
This stat is completely made up, and it is based on the utter and complete shameful ignorance of both Crystal and Sagar on what an investor purchasing a home actually means. You see, if you go to any statistical breakdown of this, what you will find out is that an investor is anybody who buys a home for the purpose of not living in it. And what do I mean by that? So if you're going to buy a home and you're going to move in and that's where you're going to live, you are not considered an investor. However, if you are going to buy a home and you want to rent it out to somebody, you are counted as an investor, whether you're a big financial firm, an institutional investor, or if you're an individual who's just trying to make money. If you buy a rundown house, you fix it up, and then you want to sell it to somebody else, that makes you an investor.
And these are traditionally called flippers.
If you buy, like the communist senator from Vermont, a vacation home, since that's not your primary residence, you are also an investor. If you buy, like the communist senator from Vermont, a home in Washington, D.C. so that you can be closer to your work when you're working in Washington, D.C., then that is not your permanent residence. So again, you are an investor in that scenario. The 1 in 5 number does not refer to investors in the way that you're thinking of them.
See, just a few years ago, it was 1 in 5. Now it's up to 28%, so beyond 1 in 4. So it's just a recycled talking point, it sounds like.
And the way that Crystal Ball is thinking of them as in institutional investment operations. It just refers to people in general that are buying these homes for whatever purpose, as long as that purpose isn't to move into the home and not sell it in a quick turnaround, or rent it out, or do something else with it. Now, if you want to know the number of institutional investors buying single-family homes, it's actually less than 1%. Now, I have seen some numbers that suggest that the less than 1% number may have risen closer to 2% in recent years. However, the original less than 1% number comes from the Federal Reserve, which typically has more detailed statistics on large financial institutions.
Okay, so I went this far in the video because I think this data is helpful, and we'll be coming back to that. But yeah, we can see that good old Robert Reich, he's playing this same game that Crystal and Sagar were back in 2021. Throwing out misleading statistics to get everyone all worked up. Then there's Robert Reich's talking point about how, these iBuyers, these investors, they just buy up properties before actual human beings get a chance to make a bid on them. He says that they're outbid. I think this is very misleading, even according to one source that Robert Reich cites, which is this article from the New York Times. Talks a little bit about this phenomenon, saying homeowners were inundated with calls, text messages, letters, and emails from people offering to buy their homes, sights unseen, so they don't even bother looking at the house. The buyers closed fast and used inscrutable names that ended in LLC, adding that cash offers from investors are appealing. A homeowner does not have to stage the house, wait for an appraisal and inspection, or watch the sale fall apart if a buyer cannot get a mortgage. What this New York Times article I don't think mentions here is that a lot of these purchases actually go below market value. And this article over on CNBC talks about this. This was put up earlier this year in 2024 by Jason Stauffer. What do those we buy houses for cash companies actually do? And the article mentions this type of deal comes with a significant drawback. If you sell your house this way, you are bound to get much less money than what your house would sell for on the open market. So I don't know if it's fair to consider these buyers being outbid when the houses sell for under market value to begin with, and they're not even put on the market in the first place. And you might be wondering, why would anyone in their right mind want to leave money on the table by selling their house below market? There are a lot of people who might be interested in these sorts of deals. As the article goes on to talk about, a lot of these people might be in pre-foreclosure, they might be going through a divorce and might be eager to move on with their life and cash out on their asset. Some of these people might have inherited property from a family member, and they don't want to deal with the hassle of putting money in the home to get it all fixed up and looking nice so that they can put it on the market. A lot of these people just want to cash out as soon as possible and not deal with all the risks and hassle that are discussed in the New York Times article that Robert Reich himself cites in this video. And as we're going to see later on in the video, I think Robert Reich thinks that this sort of stuff should be illegal. At least big fat cats on Wall Street and big investors should be prohibited from offering these sorts of cash deals, which I imagine would have downstream implications, especially for a lot of these desperate sellers. Might make them more vulnerable to losing their house, losing their asset if they don't have any willing buyers with cash willing to take their houses and assets off of their hands as soon as possible. And, you know, I'm sure if we were ever to read any horror stories about this stuff happening, if Robert Reich were to ever get his way, I'm sure Robert Reich would come out and point fingers and blame corporate greed or Wall Street or tax cuts for the rich or some shit. And then we have this talking point about how by 2030, 40% of single-family rentals will be controlled by Wall Street and hedge funds. Woo! So let's start by talking about the makeup of the single-family rental market as it is now. Going back to the New York Times article that Robert Reich cites in his video, it says nationwide, institutional investors own 3.8% of the country's 15.1 million single-family rentals. Just 3.8%, not 28%. Definitely nowhere close to 40%. Then there is this article. This is also another source that Robert Reich cites in his video. This is the Joint Center for Housing Studies from Harvard University. According to this source, according to one estimate by Adam Travis tabulating Zillow ZTRAC's data for 2018, so this might be dated information, but this is a source that Robert Reich cited, investors with at least 1,000 properties, so we're talking about big players that have 1,000 or more properties, owned just 2% of small rental properties. This includes single-family homes and multifamily structures with 2 to 4 units. At the same time, micro-investors or mom-and-pop landlords with 1 to 2 units owned 2/3, 66% of all small rental properties. Also, by Reich's own admission, he also brings up this piece from the Wall Street Journal showing that investor purchases have actually gone down. And yeah, they have. They peaked in 2022. In the second quarter of 2022, I guess investors bought 237,000 houses. As of the fourth quarter of 2023, that went down to 122,000 houses. Keep in mind that investors include people like flippers, you know, going back to AJW's video, flippers who buy houses and then fix them up and then resell them. You could say that this, does drive up the prices of housing. Understandably so, because value is being added to these houses. But a lot of these investor purchases, they're being fixed up, and I am sure that a lot of these houses then get put on the market and are sold to people who are going to live in them and not just be indefinitely rented out. Either way, at this rate, investors will not own 40% of the single-family rental market by 2023. Definitely not with this rate. I think they're going to have to get to 6 to 7 million single-family rental units. at this pace, they're going to have to do a lot more than this, according to this source from the Wall Street Journal, at least not with the current inventory of single-family rental units. So now we got to ask, where does this figure come from? Robert Reich cites this article from CNBC, put up on February 21st, 2023, and in the first paragraph, it talks about how institutional investors may control 40% of U.S. single-family rental homes by 2030, according to MetLife Investment Management. And this is also a prevalent talking point I've noticed from a lot of what I call doom and gloom economists, doomers, and also populist types, as actual Justice Warrior dealt with 3 years ago when reacting to Crystal and Sagar. People who just want to blame every problem on the elites and on Wall Street and on hedge funds. Putting this idea out there of, hey, why can't you afford to own a home? Why can't you afford rent? Why can't the average Joe in America afford to own the American dream any more? Well, because it's because of greed on Wall Street. It's because of hedge funds or whatever. Now, I have a problem with this particular claim, is that I cannot find anything. Everything that I've read from MetLife, I cannot find this claim anywhere from anything I've read from MetLife. I've read much of this report that has to deal with the issue of single-family rentals. Maybe I glossed over it. Maybe I missed it. Maybe I was not paying attention. Maybe someone drew this conclusion from interpreting data from sources like MetLife. I don't know. Either way, what I found interesting about this particular report from MetLife dealing with the issue of single-family rentals is that it confirms a lot of what I've been saying for the last few years about housing, the problems with housing, the causes of housing shortages and high rents, high housing prices. And two, some of the claims in this report are actually pretty optimistic. And just start right here. You'll notice this chart on the right-hand side. It shows how since 1970 until 2010, the net new supply of housing was higher than new demand. In the 1990s and the decade between 2000 and 2010, net new supply of housing, about 15 million units of net new supply was added to the housing market, which was higher than new demand. That changed between 2010 and 2020, as we can see, when fewer than 5 million net new houses were added to the market. And they say that some reasons for this were labor and zoning constraints. Labor and zoning constraints have hindered the supply the last decade. Labor and zoning constraints. I've long said that zoning laws, especially in big cities, are a reason why we don't get a lot of new housing developments. And then down here, it says labor and material shortages. Labor and material shortages suggest that the residential market may struggle to achieve 1.6 million units of new construction per year. Material shortages. Recall I put up a video a few years ago titled Millennials, the Minimum Wage Generation, where I was reacting to this boneheaded meme about how, housing prices are through the roof. Average house, according to the meme, was like $550,000. And the reason why millennials couldn't afford it is because the federal minimum wage is still like $7.25 an hour. As if millennials, people aged 30 to 40, are all making the federal minimum wage, which is just... Anyway, in that video, I mentioned a reason why housing costs are so high and new housing construction costs are so high is because of material shortages, increased costs for materials like lumber, thanks in part due to tariffs and restrictions on materials like lumber from Canada. Well, the good news is, according to an article put up by the National Association of Home Builders back in February, the U.S. Department of Commerce has signaled that it plans to raise tariffs later this year on imports of Canadian softwood lumber products from the current rate of 8% to about 14%. Oh, wait a minute. That's terrible news. Later on, it claims that lumber tariffs, they have a detrimental effect on housing affordability. In effect, The lumber tariffs act as a tax on American builders, home buyers, and consumers. On top of that, President jibber-jabbering Joe Biden announced just the other day that he's increasing tariffs on steel and aluminum coming from China. Which I guess you could say, you know, a lot of the imports of steel, a lot of the imported steel in the United States does not come from China. It actually comes from friendlier countries like South Korea, Japan, Canada, and Brazil. But I don't imagine this is going to help much, especially with all this new housing that we need to build before 2030. The article mentions later on how NIMBYism causes severe supply shortages. Yeah, the NIMBYism antics of Robert Reich, who whenever he sees new housing developments in his area, he says, hey, not in my backyard, buddy.
What an asshole!
But going back up, this report by MetLife also talks about how the labor and zoning constraints mentioned may continue to create structural challenges.
Uh-oh, SpaghettiOs!
For example, a decline in immigration and an increase in college education rates have both subtracted from the availability of construction labor. Additionally, the recently passed $1 trillion infrastructure package, it ended up being $1.2 trillion, may further crowd out construction labor later this decade. So it sounds like even restrictions on legal immigration have had an impact on the current housing market in the United States. But putting all that aside for a second, like I said, this report has some optimistic points. As we can see right here, it says, we estimate 15.5 million housing units will be built in the 2020s. If you read the report, there are a lot of ifs, ands, and buts made to that point, but it seems like they're a little confident there that we're going to get 15 to 16 million new housing units. And then on page 7, it says that if we do reach the 16 million unit threshold, then we would expect housing costs, both rent and purchase price, to grow at or slightly below the rate of inflation later this decade, while we believe that construction of fewer than 16 million housing units, new housing units, would result in above inflationary growth. But it sounds like they're a little optimistic about that, about the houses being built. But if they're not, I guess we can expect housing prices and rents to raise.
Uh-oh, SpaghettiOs!
Then we got this part where it talks about how the institutionalization of single-family rentals could lead to rent becoming more affordable than owning an equivalently quality home, and that this could lead to a rise in popularity of master-planned rental communities. And I think it's interesting that this sort of stuff, it's not reported by the doom and gloom economics types. It's not reported by the populist types. You know, they'll cite MetLife to get everyone all mad and worked up and bent out of shape at Wall Street and hedge funds and the elites. Yet they don't want to talk about the root causes of housing prices and rent prices or solutions to these said problems. And I imagine a reason for that is because it might require some of these knuckleheads to rethink a few things. Maybe take a little bit responsibility, like in the case of Robert Reich. You might have to take a little bit of responsibility for his not in my backyard antics. Some people might have to rethink their stances on issues like immigration restrictions and international trade restrictions, which are often done in the name of helping the American worker. And I've talked about how we've seen similar trends in California. In California, we have what are called prevailing wage mandates, which drive up the cost of new construction developments for housing here in California. Also, construction unions have a history of using CEQA lawsuits to extort developers for larger contracts, which, sure, in the short run means higher paying jobs, larger, better paying jobs. But in the long run, this means that housing is less affordable to these workers, probably means that they have to spend more of their income on housing, and or they have to deal with longer commutes to their jobs, which means more money spent on gasoline, which is not exactly cheap here in the state of California. Either way, longer commutes means less time they get to enjoy in their everyday life. In other words, a lot of this pro-worker, all of this economic intervention done all the name to help the worker is counterintuitive in the long run. But I guess good old Robert Reich has some solutions. I guess we should check some of those out. Here are Robert Reich's solutions to these problems to address the housing shortage.
So what can we do about this? Start by getting Wall Street out of our homes.
Yeah.
Democrats have introduced a bill in both houses of Congress to ban hedge funds and private equity firms from buying or owning single-family homes.
Yeah.
If signed into law, this could increase the supply of homes available to individual buyers.
Could increase the supply. Now, let's apply this logic to anything else. Let's say you're going to the Apple store to get your hands on a brand new iPhone. Only one problem. They're a little low on inventory. Maybe they have, say, 5 iPhones in inventory, yet there are 20 customers in the store also trying to get their hands on one of those 5 iPhones. Now imagine someone like Robert Reich waltzing into the store to say, well, clearly we have a shortage problem of iPhones in the store, so the solution is to tell 10 of these customers to take a hike and that they're not allowed to buy the phone today. Now, in this scenario, has the inventory, the supply of iPhones at this particular Apple store increased? Yeah, just gotta stick it to Wall Street, right?
Thereby making housing more affordable. President Biden has also made it a priority to tackle the housing crisis, proposing billions in funding to increase the supply of homes.
Yeah, we're gonna subsidize the supply of homes.
And tax credits to help actual people buy them.
Yeah, we're gonna help actual people with tax credits. So we're gonna subsidize demand too. Subsidizing demand. You know, that tends to drive prices up, not down. And subsidizing supply, making American taxpayers pay for new housing developments. Not only is this outrageous, but it's also not really necessary considering that big bad Wall Street and big bad investors, they're already investing money into new developments, at least according to some of the sources that Robert Reich uses in this video. Like going back to this article from CNBC. Talks about how companies like Tricon Residential, Progress Residential, American Homes for Rent, and Invitation Homes have each bought thousands of homes. They have also added to the housing supply in some cases with built-for-rent communities, which then links to this article from CNBC. Big landlords jump into the home building business as demand for single-family rentals surges. And according to this article, American Homes for Rent, I guess, has built more than 100 rental-only communities in the last 5 years. The National Association of Home Builders has said that 13,000 new single-family homes started as rentals in the first quarter of this year. I think this was put up in 2022. Homes built for rent still represents just 5% of the home building market, but that's up from 2.7% historical average. We also have reports of Americans Home for Rent adding developments, which includes 220 homes in the Charlotte area. Then there was this Wall Street Journal article that Robert Reich cited at one point in the video, where it talks about how the Blackstone, big bad Blackstone, the Blackstone-owned Tricon, which owns more than 35,000 homes, they have moved toward building new homes. And it links to this other article from the Wall Street Journal from 2021, which reports how close to 100,000 built-to-rent homes will have started construction this year. And then going back to this piece from the Joint Center for Housing Studies from Harvard University, they report how single-family built for rent hit a record high in 2022. It seems to have been increasing since at least 2018. Reached 80,000 units in 2022. Now, these numbers still lag far behind MetLife's target of 1.6 million new homes per year target. And who knows? Maybe more housing would have already been built or would be currently in development if not for all these regulations that impact housing development. You know, according to MetLife, a lot of new homes, millions of new homes need to be built. And now we got to ask, who do we think is going to front the money to build these 16 million new homes by 2030? Well, Big Bad Wall Street seems to be already doing it. And, you know, going back to Robert Reich's solutions, really think about what he's advocating here, what he really wants. He wants to subsidize supply. Robert Reich would prefer that you, the American taxpayer, who he likes to think of himself as a mouthpiece for, he wants the American taxpayer to front the money to build millions of new homes instead of just letting big bad Wall Streets and big bad investors spend their money to build new homes because they might make profits off of it. Also, I guess letting Wall Street and big investors build these new rentals, it might eventually lead to investors owning a greater share of the rental market, maybe as much as 40% by 2030. And that is if we take MetLife at face value, which I'm not even sure if I do, but since everyone else seems to be doing so these days, I thought it was just worth highlighting a few of the other claims made in this particular MetLife report. Then there's the question over whether or not this is even a bad thing of investors, Wall Street fat cats gaining a significant share of the single-family rental market. I looked into this. There seems to be this ongoing debate over whether or not mom and pop, small potatoes landlords are preferable to corporate landlords, either small or large. There seems to be pros and cons to both, and I'm sure in both camps there are bad actors, shady actors, and whatnot. Even that New York Times piece that I referenced earlier, it talks about a renter who said that she prefers her previous mom and pop landlord to her new corporate landlord. I don't really have a strong opinion on that either way. I think that's up for consumers to decide. Anyway, there are a ton of problems. There are a ton of problems in the current housing market, which I have talked about for years. Thankfully, we have people like Robert Reich over here who are here to make things even worse. Oh, yeah, and remember when California Governor goofy-ass Gavin Newsom rolled out the red carpet last year for Xi Jinping, the communist dictator of China, invited him to California to talk about their shared commitment to saving the world from climate change? Well, I guess so much for that, with Gavin Newsom's buddy in the Democrat Party, Joe Biden, now slapping all these tariffs and restrictions on solar panels and electric vehicles.